Look around at any group of people today and you'll notice something the human eye is trained to see instantly: skin color. Deep brown, pale pink, every shade in between. It feels like one of the most obvious differences between people. But here's the strange part: none of it existed for most of human history. Every single person who has ever lived traces back to the same dark-skinned population in Africa. So somewhere along the way, something changed. And the reason why is one of the most quietly dramatic stories in human biology. To understand it, you have to start with a problem our ancestors didn't choose: the sun. Early humans evolved in equatorial Africa, under some of the strongest sunlight on the planet. That sunlight carries ultraviolet radiation, and UV isn't gentle. It damages DNA. It breaks down a critical molecule in the body called folate, which plays an essential role in healthy reproduction. In an environment with constant intense sun exposure, the damage adds up fast, and it directly affects who survives long enough to have children. This is where melanin comes in. Melanin is the pigment responsible for skin color, but its real job isn't cosmetic. It's protective. It absorbs and scatters UV radiation before it can reach deeper into the skin. Under the harsh African sun, more melanin meant better protection, healthier reproduction, and a clear survival advantage. Over countless generations, that advantage compounded. Dark skin wasn't just common, it was, quite literally, the original human default. Then people started to move. Beginning tens of thousands of years ago, groups of humans slowly spread out of Africa, into the Middle East, across Europe, deep into Asia, and eventually into entirely new continents. No one planned this migration. It happened gradually, one generation walking slightly farther than the last. But as populations moved away from the equator, something fundamental shifted: the sunlight itself grew weaker. At first, that sounds like good news: less UV damage, less risk. Except the same sunlight that had been dangerous in Africa was also responsible for something essential elsewhere: vitamin D production. Skin uses UV rays to manufacture vitamin D, which the body needs for strong bones, a functioning immune system, and healthy pregnancies. In regions with far less available sunlight, skin that was excellent at blocking UV became a liability instead of an asset. Too much melanin in a low-light environment meant too little vitamin D, and that came with serious consequences, especially for bone development and reproductive health. So the same trait that had been essential in Africa slowly became a disadvantage the farther people moved from it. And evolution, which has no loyalty to any particular outcome, simply followed the pressure. Populations with slightly less melanin absorbed slightly more usable sunlight. Slightly better vitamin D production meant slightly stronger bones and slightly better odds of survival. Multiply that tiny advantage across thousands of generations, and skin tone gradually shifted to match the environment people were living in. Here's where the story gets genuinely surprising. This didn't happen quickly, and it didn't happen the way most people assume. Ancient DNA from early European populations shows that people living in places like Britain thousands of years ago still had notably dark skin, long after their ancestors had already settled in northern latitudes. Lighter skin becoming widespread across those regions happened much more recently than most people expect, tied closely to changes in diet and lifestyle rather than simply time spent in a colder climate. And it wasn't just Europe solving this problem. Populations across East Asia also evolved lighter skin compared to their ancestors, but many of the specific genetic changes responsible are different from the ones that shaped European populations. Two separate populations, facing a similar environmental problem, independently arrived at strikingly similar solutions using different biological toolkits. That's not a coincidence. That's the same evolutionary pressure showing up more than once, solved more than once, because the underlying problem, sunlight and vitamin D, was powerful enough to shape human bodies again and again. This is also where the common idea of a few neat skin color categories completely falls apart. Human pigmentation doesn't split people into 3 or 4 boxes. It exists along a continuous spectrum, shaped by exactly how much UV radiation a population's ancestors were exposed to, how their diet supplemented or replaced that sunlight, and how often different groups mixed together over thousands of years. North Africans, West Africans, South Asians, East Asians, indigenous Australians, each followed a slightly different evolutionary path shaped by their own environment. There was never a clean dividing line. Only gradual, overlapping shifts across geography. And that reveals something important. If you traced every human alive today far enough back, every single lineage converges on the same origin point in Africa. The visible differences we notice today represent an extremely recent chapter in a much longer shared story, a tiny fraction of the time our species has existed. So when did our ancestors start developing different skin tones? The honest answer is, gradually, unevenly, and far more recently than most people assume, driven not by identity or culture, but by something as simple as how much sunlight a particular patch of the planet happened to receive. Every skin tone alive today is really the same story, told in a different shade, one species, adapting again and again to the same star, in whatever sky it happened to be standing under.